Okay, you guys are live.
Okay. Good morning. This is the Lancaster County Board of Commissioners Zoom meeting for Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. I am the Lancaster County Board Chair, Sean Flowerday. With us is Vice Chair Rick Vest and Commissioners Roma Amundsen, Deb Shore, and Krista Yoakum. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the republic
for which it stands,
one
one
nation,
nation,
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
with liberty and
liberty
justice
and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk, will you please begin?
A copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is located on the wall of the hearing room.
Additionally, a copy of our material to be discussed at today's open meeting is available in room 113. The material can also be viewed on the county's website at lancaster.ne.gov. Agenda item 1 are minutes. Approve the minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting held on Tuesday, April 14, 2020.
I move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Shore,
yes.
Amundsen,
Yes.
Yoakum,
Yes.
West,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Next is claims. Approve all claims processed through April 21st, 2020.
Move approval?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
West,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundsen,
Yes.
Yoakum,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Next is number 3, consent items. These are routine business items that are expected to be adopted without dissent. Any individual item may be removed for special discussion and consideration by a commissioner or by any member of the public without prior notice. Unless there's an exception, these items will be approved as one with a single vote of the Board of Commissioners. These items are approval of amendments to the following contract. C-668 with Rise and Shine Campus
Services at various county locations. C-19-352 with General Fire and Safety Equipment Company, Inc. for annual service, fire extinguisher inspection, testing, and maintenance. C-17-747 with Wood River Energy, LLC for annual supply, natural gas, and related services. Utility permits for the following with no cost to the county. Number 1971, allowing Windstream, Nebraska to install new fiber optic cable in the county right-of-way along A Street from South 98th Street to South 112th Street. Number 1974, allowing Windstream, Nebraska to relocate utilities as part of Project 19-09 North 14th Street from Waverly to McKelvey Road. Receive and place on file the Prudential Retirement Specimen Government 457B Plan revised February 2017.
Move approval of the consent items.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundsen,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Next is number 4, public hearing. This is amendment of the Lancaster County General Assistance Guidelines.
Are any members of the public here to speak?
Dan, I believe that Sarah Hoyle sent you a statement that she wants read into the record for her testimony.
Yes, she did. Would you like me to do that now, Sean?
Please.
Sarah sent this yesterday The proposed change in the Lancaster County General Assistance Guidelines can be found on page 3, Chapter 1, under General Provisions. The specific language proposed is the director may suspend the strict application of these general provisions during the period a local emergency or disaster has been declared by the Board of County Commissioners of Lancaster County, Nebraska. If strict compliance with these general provisions would in any way prevent, hinder, or delay necessary action in coping with the declared local emergency or disaster. This was added due to the necessity of expediting the general assistance application process in certain circumstances during the COVID-19 emergency.
Very good. Well, if there's no members of public here to speak, then I'll go ahead and close the public hearing, and we can move on to new business.
New business 4A is amendment of the Lancaster County General Assistance Guidelines.
Move
I
approval?
move- Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Number 2 is amusement license renewal application from Jan and Daryl Hauser for an event at Pine Creek Farms, 11505 North 14th Street, Raymond, Nebraska, on May 30th, 2020.
I move approval.
Second that.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, Commissioner, we did get a note too, asking us to remind folks that these approvals are conditional on the fact that the social distancing policies are not what they are now. In other words, the health directives at this time would preclude an event like this from happening. We are optimistic that everyone's responsible efforts to prevent the spread of the virus will help us have these directives be removed by the time this event is scheduled.
Very good. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. C is to authorize the payment of $20,000 from the Inmate Benefit Fund to Good News Jail and Prison Ministries of Fairfax, Virginia, for providing a full-time and 2 part-time chaplains for Lancaster County Corrections inmates.
Move approval.
Second?
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Just would like to make one comment. Brad did send a letter or an email, and he just wanted to make sure that it was on the record that these are inmate benefit funds. This is not property tax dollars, and that it comes from phone commission and inmate vending commissions. And I also found it very interesting that in addition to Reverend Sheldon, that's been with us for many, many years, in the last year, they've been able to add 2 additional part-time chaplains. And so I think it really shows the need and the services that they are providing to our inmates while they are housed with us at the county jail.
Okay. Very good. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. 5D is a contract with Enterprise Holdings to provide national car rental services. The term of the contract is upon execution through September 15, 2020. The MOU may be renewed for 5 additional 1-year terms. The pricing will be pursuant to the state of Nebraska, to the state of Oregon NASPO Valued Point Master Agreement. The cost of county is not to exceed $30,000.
Move approval.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. E is recommendations from the purchasing agent and county engineer to award and execute a purchase order for supplying and hauling crushed rock surface course material to the following: Gannett Trucking and Excavating in the amount of $400,860, and Westover Rock and Sand, Inc. in the amount of $331,450.
Pam Dingman, Lancaster County Engineer. This is our spring crushed rock order, and so it did come in a little higher than it's come in the past, which is a bummer. But on the good news, it turns out that gasoline is a little cheaper than we had forecast. So we're going to go ahead and buy the following quantities of rock. I have put up on the screen for everyone to see the locations of our stockpiles. Also, just so that you guys are aware, as of a couple weeks ago, we have received all of our crushed rock that we ordered in July. And so we're hoping that this order can be delivered before the end of August, and that will help us solve our material shortage so that we will be prepared for flooding and winter in the future.
I would move approval.
I'll second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. 5F is recommendations from purchasing agent and county engineer to award and execute a purchase order for supplying and hauling crushed rock surface course material to the following: Buell Trucking, Inc. in the amount of $120,000, Gannett Trucking and Excavating in the amount of $291,660, and Westover Rock and Sand, Inc. in the amount of $85,350.
I will move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Pam Dingman, Lancaster County Engineer. As stated before, this is for the spring gravel award. We actually have not received the gravel that we ordered in July of last year. There continues to be a gravel shortage, which is why we've been using gravel very sparingly on our 1,100 miles of gravel roads. We're hoping again that this will get us caught up by August or so that we are ready to go in the future, and we won't have to continue to face material shortages.
Pam, what happens with the gravel that we've already ordered? I mean, have we already paid for the stuff we should have received previously?
Actually, thanks for that question, Commissioner Flowerday. We pay for it as it's delivered, so we encumber the money, so that money is held in the budget to pay for that, and then we're paying for it again as it's delivered. We actually collect rock tickets for all the deliveries so that we can verify the tonnage, and that is kind of an internal accounting thing that we do here on a regular basis.
Okay. Oh, Commissioner Vest?
Yeah, so Pam, then the fact that we're awarding these contracts for the hauling of and the second one, as I understand it, is gravel. The fact that we're awarding these contracts now to the trucking firms, that indicates that delivery is coming?
Well, Commissioner Vest, we would hope so. And so we think that this year it's going to be easier to get the gravel here than it has last year. What has really happened since last July is the trucks go to the quarry, and the quarry has so much materials when they open up in the morning, and when the materials are gone, they send the trucks away. So although trucks for Lancaster County from these contractors have been showing up at the quarry for a long time now, sometimes they'll sit for a couple hours and they won't get any materials, and they run out and they return home. And so we're, again, hoping that the quarries will have an opportunity to get caught up this year, and we won't face these problems in the future.
That sounds like Cool Hand Luke. What we have here is a failure to communicate. I mean, trucks are showing up when there's no gravel to be hauled. I assume they're working through the details of that.
So you may recall that last December we met with Martin Marietta, and they stated that they're running their quarries 16 to 17 hours a day. So, I mean, they have that quarry at full throttle. If you're not in line, you're not going to get any rock. And so it really becomes a factor of who's in line for the rock the soonest when the quarry opens, which is it's just an unfortunate place to be, which again is why we have really gone out and put the minimal amount of rock and the minimal amount of gravel on our roads for the last year, because they didn't want to run out and not be able to get people in and out of their homes.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, please call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. G is a recommendation from the purchasing agent and county engineer to award a unit price contract to Eurotech USA, Inc. for soil stabilization. The annual estimated expenditure is $200,000 per year.
Pam Dingman, Lancaster County Engineer. This is what you've heard me refer to as the foam bridges. Last year was the first time we'd used foam injection in order to stabilize material behind bridge abutments. A contract similar to this allowed us to stabilize 3 bridges and reopen them to Lancaster County. Our intent is to go and start using this on our bridges that are not to the point where they need to be closed yet, but get ahead of that. The first bridge that we intend to use foam injection on this year is the Hickman Viaduct, which is experiencing some settlement issues. Yeah, behind the abutment, and so we're going to go ahead and pump that thing full of foam and stabilize it for the future. You know, really, Commissioner Shore, it's like any other kind of maintenance. You know, if you have a car, you're going to maintain it. If you you know, you should do general maintenance even to your own driveway. And so that goes back to the emphasis I'm putting on our program is let's maintain the stuff we have so that it doesn't get to the point that we're closing it or have major revisions and repairs to do.
If it's not too much to ask, I would be interested in seeing that process as it happens. I don't know if you would be notified by the contractor when they'll be doing that work, but I certainly would be interested in seeing it.
It is an interesting process to see. And so we, of course, can go ahead and invite you out when we're doing that.
Thank you.
Okay.
This is a really great and innovative idea. I think that, Pam, that is absolutely wonderful that you found out about this. I would go ahead and move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
I would just like to add that this is a local small business that does this work. And so this is pushing out funds to local small business in order to stabilize our economy.
Very good.
Very good.
Okay, please call the roll.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. H is a recommendation from the purchasing agent and county engineer to award a contract to Pavers Inc. for asphalt paving and resurfacing. The total cost of the contract is $3,364,576.83.
Pam Dingman, Lancaster County Engineer. This is our annual asphalt maintenance contract. And as I've shared the screen, you'll notice that this year it's in 4 parts. Northwest 126th Street is in pretty rough shape, and it would be good, of course, to get that stabilized. In addition, we have a little piece of West Adams while we're there that actually goes into Branched Oak that we're looking forward to getting overlaid. And then a little tiny half-mile piece of South Coddington Avenue that is still within county's jurisdiction that is also meets the criteria for overlay. And then moving down south to overlay Panama Road. All the way actually from South 68th Street over to the village of Panama. And so this is part one of our asphalt maintenance this year. We'll be coming to you in upcoming weeks with chip seal as well as crack sealing and striping. And so again, part one of asphalt maintenance, really putting the focus on maintaining our paved roads before they have to be overlaid or replaced.
I would move approval.
Second?
We've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion?
Pam, was this about the price point you were expecting for this contract?
Actually, we were pleasantly surprised that this came in about $500,000 under our engineer's estimate. And again, we're going to distribute that money to other places in construction to get out as much construction as we can before the end of the budget year. I do expect, and here's a little bit of a bummer with it. The price we get for the asphalt overlay is the price we get when we bid it. Yesterday's crash of the oil market, I think, will ultimately have a big impact on what we see for asphalt prices next year. But as far as this, it was a little cheaper than we anticipated. There's the possibility that next year or maybe this fall prices could be a lot cheaper than anticipated.
And Pam, I'd just like to confirm an assumption I made here. This is money from the current year's budget that you're spending, and this money's already been authorized.
That is correct, Commissioner Best. And so the practice of the engineering department, because of the way that the budget lays out, is to go ahead and bid these projects in the spring and encumber the money into the next year. Because the board does not approve typically the budget until September, by state statute, we would only be allowed to spend 1/12 a month of our budget for July, August, and September if we didn't do projects this way.
Yep. And Deb, I think the other bid we received was like 3.8 million, if that's right, Pam. So this is, yeah, that one was right on target with the estimate, and this one came in under. So. Okay. Is there any further discussion?
I guess I could add also, this work will also be completed by a Lancaster County construction firm.
That's appreciated. Please call the roll.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Number 6 is update on COVID-19 on Lancaster County response. 6A is temporary alternative housing for essential county employees.
Chief Deputy Duncan, do you want to start us off, or who's starting?
Certainly. Good morning, Todd Duncan, Chief Deputy Sheriff's Office. Thanks for the opportunity to come back in front of you to speak about the temporary quarantine housing program that we are trying to make available to our staff, our deputies. The current status is that the city has finalized their protocol and their arrangements with the Hilton Garden Inn down in the Haymarket. There has been some negotiation on the discounted rate for those rooms, and the health department, under the guidance of Pat Lopez, has agreed to pick up the cost of any rooms that are used by the essential service employees that take advantage of this. And so we've got the protocol established, and Jen Holloway has helped us immensely with getting a county version of that prepared over the last couple of days. So I think she was going to possibly present the basic foundation or the fundamentals of that county arrangement or plan.
Yeah, so I can pick it up from here. We had worked on a policy yesterday to get this in place. There, like Todd said, there were some changes that kind of, originally this was supposed to be a donation from the hotel, but there was kind of a discussion with the city that if funding became available, that they would like to recoup some of their costs. And so there was a discussion between City Attorney's Office and the Hilton Gardens yesterday. And so they had worked out a price. It's now going to be $59 a day, and that includes an $8 breakfast every morning. We are not aware of how much funding there is. They think it'll mainly be like a lump sum, and then we just kind of, eat that away as employees utilize the housing. So it's not a guarantee that it'll be completely covered, depending on how many people use the housing. So I guess that's one of my questions for you guys is, in the event funding is no longer available, or the rooms, so we are allotted 50 rooms right now, and and there is the potential for us to have access to another floor. And in the event all the rooms are being utilized by city and county employees, or in the event that funding is no longer available, that's one direction we need from the board, is how you guys would like to go forward. If you want to continue, if you guys would then take on the cost to cover that housing, what you guys would like to do.
Yeah, Commissioner Short.
Question, is this FEMA funds that Pat is going to access, and are they specifically for, a housing reimbursement? I mean, there's been very little funding allocated to local governments at this point. So I was just curious what the pool of funding that she's accessing.
So I actually don't know. We got this information about 3 p.m. yesterday, and I had reached out to Chris from the City Attorney's Office to get more information. And I honestly don't know all the facts yet, because we were working off this being based as a donation, and that changed yesterday afternoon. So we're kind of on the fly making changes right now.
Right now, we are, I'm just trying to figure out what's before us. Right now, we are trying to decide, Pat Lopez is setting aside a certain amount of funds. We don't know what those funds, how much that is. And right now we're trying to decide what we would do when those funds ran out.
Correct. So I guess I can back up. I'll just start from the beginning. So like Todd said, and when he met with you guys during a staff meeting a couple weeks ago, this was kind of, the intent of this was to put housing in place for those deemed essential employees. There was a question, because at first this was just going to be available to first responders. And we had kind of backed out, because when discussions with the board, we had talked about how our definition of an essential employee is a little bit broader, because of corrections and the youth services center. And really the definition that we're using is based on the essential employee testing directive that was updated just a couple days ago, and I shared with you guys. And so first off, we need to know if that's okay with you guys, the housing, this isn't just for sheriff's deputies. It could be anyone under that policy that's deemed essential, and that can change every day. It can grow every day. And so that's part of the question before you guys, is letting you know who all this applies to, and that the list can grow every day. It kind of just depends on the nature of who gets sick, and then who is determined an essential employee under that policy, and who might need housing. And with this, there's also kind of an eligibility to go through to determine who can have housing. And so first, they would obviously need to be an essential employee under that directive. They would have to become symptomatic, be in the process of getting tested. And then if, while they're awaiting test results, they can utilize that housing. And then the event that they test positive.
Back up. So we're saying that they're not eligible for this unless they're symptomatic.
Right. So the housing is, so in the event, it's to.
Jen, you answered something there, but you broke up. I didn't catch what you said.
Okay, sorry. Let me know if I break up again. So the housing is to be used by those who don't want to infect their family. That's the short of it.
Yeah.
And so they would, if they become symptomatic and there's a need for them to be tested, they would be given the option of utilizing the hotel room while they're going through that testing process.
Okay,
So
well, we've missed the entire point then of them not contaminating their families, because the whole point of this, I thought, was someone is exposed in the job. They recognize before they've gone home, they recognize they probably need to quarantine for a while. For example, they responded to someone who was coughing into their face. But most people don't develop symptoms for. I mean, the shortest guess that I've heard is 4 days. I've heard longer estimates than that. So that means that they're at home for 4 to 5 days before they go to the hospital. Sorry, Chief Deputy Duncan, I think you had something.
Yeah, and I think one thing we've all learned in this whole new experience is it's an uncharted territory, and so things are changing daily. I think it was last week the recommendations from the CDC came out and updated interim guidance for first responders, and it talked about when a first responder can continue to work after having an exposure. And prior to that, we had been putting employees into a work restriction or exclusion from work status for 14 days when they had what was deemed a close, prolonged exposure. Well, the CDC last week came forward and said that is no longer the standard for first responders. The standard for first responders now is, regardless of their exposure to a suspected or positive COVID-19 individual, they are able to continue to work unless they develop symptoms. There was a precautionary measure there that if they did have a close, prolonged contact with someone suspected of being COVID-19 positive, that they should take additional precautionary steps in the workplace for 14 days, for instance, wear a face covering, in the event that they did develop symptoms later. So there's two different, first of all, so the CDC guidance has kind of changed over the last week for first responder exposures. And then secondly, there are two housing options out there for us right now. There is this one that the city has secured through the Hilton Garden, which has a set of criteria. It's really two sets of criteria. One is that you have symptoms and you're either awaiting testing or you have tested positive. And two, you have somebody in the home that's in a high risk category, a cohabitant, and you have no alternative place to go. So that's the local criteria. Under the state's housing model right now, they also require that the employee demonstrate or indicate that they've got a high risk individual at home, but they do not have the symptomology requirement that the local housing one has. So there's two different avenues that our first responders can go. I'd like to try to stick with the city's option because it's closer. It seems to be a good arrangement overall. It's in line with the fire department and the police department here in Lincoln. But there's always the state model we could go to as well that does not require that the employee be symptomatic, or that does, it does not require the city to be symptomatic.
If we partner with the state, we'll get, let's stick with the city, please.
Yeah.
Okay, but doesn't.
And excuse me, I do have a question. Do you have, or can you tell us how many of your staff is in symptomatic or awaiting testing or anything like this, so that we have kind of an idea? Is kind of, we're approaching, possibly some loosening of guidelines, for the businesses and so forth. And maybe we're approaching almost the end of the so-called maximum um, infection rate. Can you give us any idea as to how many people may be utilizing this?
That's kind of the $10,000 question, Commissioner, and we've been trying to figure that out as we've been trying to set up the number of rooms we're reserving in this hotel. I can tell you today, the Sheriff's Office has not had any employees test positive for COVID-19, and we do not have any employees that I'm aware of this morning who are symptomatic. And I do not believe the police department nor the fire department have had any employees test positive. And I do not believe that anyone has used this temporary housing as of yet, even though it's been in place now for several days. I think it's been in place since last Friday for the city. So to answer your question, I really don't anticipate a lot of employees requesting this quarantine housing. It's just one of many contingency plans that we're trying to put out there,
right,
to take care of our employees, and equally importantly, to communicate to our employees that we're doing everything we can to take care of them.
Yeah.
And I agree 100% with you. I agree 100% with you. So actually, I think that we could almost assume that there would not be a high usage rate. We could assume that. And so at $59 a day, it's something that that we could probably assume the cost.
And
Yeah, I'm not. Go
if
ahead.
funding is an issue, I would be comfortable if the board would even just agree to allow us to access the city program until the funds run out with the health department, because this is at no cost to the Sheriff's Office or the county, it's health department funds. And at that point, if the funds were to run out, which I don't anticipate that happening, but if it did, we could then transition to the state housing program, which is currently funded through the state.
And I would be totally in favor of that.
Just to give everyone an idea kind of the rates of testing among first responders, as of yesterday morning, LPD had 16 tests done and was had 17 tests done, 16 negative, 1 was pending. Lincoln Fire, I think, had 27 tests done and 1 was pending. Nothing has come back positive yet for many of the first responders as of yesterday morning. Perhaps that's changed in the meantime, but I haven't heard it if it has. Our sheriff's department had none pending, and all the tests that had been done had come back negative already. I'm not that worried about the cost here. If we were funding, let's say we had 10 county employees who used this, and they all stayed for 14 days, and we were paying it entirely out of our own pocket. That's $8,200 for 10 employees for 14 days. It's not nothing, but I'm not really concerned about the cost. My primary concern is this new development where they have to be symptomatic. That's the thing that actually bothers me the most. But anyways, maybe that battle's already been fought and lost.
Question, and we keep talking about the sheriff's office, but Jen, you said it's anybody that we've already classified as, front line. I mean, that's all of our corrections staff. So, I mean, we are probably talking, 400, 500 people?
Well, and so this is part of why we have to kind of take this approach. Since this would be a benefit, it would have to go through the typical process through the personnel policy board. Would have to be negotiated for the represented. And so to answer your question, yes, there could be hundreds of people in the county that are deemed essential employees under that policy. It doesn't necessarily automatically include all of them. It's if they've been determined essential by their department head or elected official.
Commissioner Vest.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing here is that we have a group of employees who don't have an option always who they're going to be dealing with during the course of a day. We have a lot of folks who can work at home and limit their exposure. The sheriff's department doesn't have that option. So we have folks that we entrust with going out and dealing with situations that most of us don't want to be involved in. This is a layer of protection for their families in that if they're following the guidelines and it's determined they need to be separate from their families, this is an option that's available to the members of our sheriff's department. And I think it's a good start. We can have conversations about the others if we feel that's important, but I really want to offer to the sheriff's department this layer of protection at this time. I don't see any reason not to go forward with this policy that Chief Deputy Duncan is asking us to support.
Commissioner Yocum, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to say I kind of agree with that. And I'm thinking that we're evaluating so many of the pieces of this on a week by week basis. We'll be keeping tabs on this. We'll know what those numbers are. We'll know how people are accessing it.
Yeah, go ahead, Chief Deputy Duncan.
I do want to throw one more request onto this because there is the issue of food, because they are being quarantined into a hotel room and visitors are restricted or not allowed. So what the city has done with the police officers and firefighters is that they can just order takeout, and they're instructed to stay within the daily per diem as if they were away on travel, and then just submit for reimbursement later. So they would pay for their food on their personal credit card or personally, and then submit reimbursement later after the quarantine housing is over. And I would ask that the board consider that as well as part of the housing.
Yeah, Commissioner Short.
Would that be reimbursed as well by the health department funds?
To my knowledge, the health department funds are only for the housing, which does include a $8 breakfast, I think, a grab and go breakfast, but the remaining meals would probably be either on the city or the county to cover the per diem cost.
Okay.
And to go along with this, that is another thing we're going to need a little bit more direction on to include in the policy, because currently there is no scheme to provide meals for this type of situation. So we would need to know that. Do you guys want to go a per diem route with caps? We'd have to, we would need to create an entire scheme for this if you guys are wanting to provide meals.
Commissioner Vest.
Now, my question would be, what is the per diem rate?
I think it's 50 for a day, if I'm not mistaken, but I can tell you the city has capped theirs for this particular program to $30 per day.
I was going to say, excuse me, you already have one meal covered, included with the room. That's the breakfast meal. So we're talking about two meals that in addition to that seems fair. You know, I don't expect them to eat from Jimmy John's every meal, but I think a reasonable cap's right. I would propose that we use the $30 figure as well.
I think following the city's lead on that is right. Commissioner Yocum.
Yeah, I was just going to say that our, travel meals generally are more expensive than what we can find here locally. So I do believe we should cap that, especially because there is the breakfast. But I did have a question about if people are using their own funds for an extended period of time, is that going to be a hardship for someone while they're waiting for that reimbursement?
I'm not hearing that from the feedback I've received from the city, and I think we'll be okay there. And I stand corrected. I think maybe our per diem, and I should know this, but I think it's 40 a day under a typical situation if you're out traveling not in a high cost locale. So I think the $30 limit per day would be more than acceptable to the staff that were to be quarantined.
This isn't a situation where P cards would be applicable, is it?
Correct. Under the P card policy, P cards are not allowed to use for meals. And I would just also like to note, providing this benefit could possibly have tax implications for employees.
I would suggest that you make your folks aware of that, Chief Duncan, that they may be considered a taxable benefit.
Yeah, Jen can correct me, but I think that's one of the last statements on the city's policy, if I'm not mistaken, that the tax implications are not clear at this time and that the employee needs to understand it may fall on them. But thank you. Yeah, that's.
Now, if we say we want to pursue, I'm a little chagrined to hear that this has to go through the Personnel Policy Review Board. They didn't move quickly last time we were trying to do something here. Like, how fast can we get this up and running? Because I want our first responders, I want our jail staff to be able to have this, and frankly, I want them to be able to have it yesterday.
So I can speak to a little bit on that. We would have to call an emergency meeting of the Personnel Policy Board. When I talked with Christy, like I said, we were already working on drafting the policy based on the donation kind of route. So we'll need to update that because of the change yesterday with the funding. But if after today we start moving forward, we could likely get this to them on April 27th.
Well,
Well, I would just
The
say,
virus
let's move
peaks-
forward as quickly as possible.
the virus peaks on April 28th. Like, we can't move faster than that. Like this has been my frustration with all this. We're projected to experience a peak on April 26th that lasts through April 28th.
Right, and I get that, but unfortunately, because this is, if you guys are wanting to do this, it would be a benefit, which would have to then be negotiated for the represented, go through the typical process. And so, like I said, we would call an emergency meeting, but they are volunteers, so, and I don't know how quickly all that can be scheduled.
Well, didn't they meet via Zoom last time?
I don't believe they did.
Well,
I think they talked about it, but I don't know if they ended up because of that executive order and who it possibly applies to.
Okay, let's go ahead and move forward with this, and we'll just direct our staff to do it. You know, please move with all reasonable expediency.
So in order to do that, I do still need a little bit more direction from you guys. Just based on this conversation, it seems like it might have changed on who you're wanting this to apply to. If it's not going to apply to all the essential employees defined under that directive, then we're going to have to create a new definition for essential employees under this policy. So if you're only wanting it to be LSO or, you know, certain people, I need to know that so we can go forward.
My thinking at this time is that the people who are most exposed is the sheriff's office, and we should start there.
I'd be
I
inclined
would throw on the Youth Services Center and correction staff as well. They're forced into a high risk environment, and there's some essential employees that do absolutely critical essential work, but not all those employees' work has a direct impact on the life and safety of the community. And I think that's the difference between first responders and corrections officers and 911 dispatchers versus other very important employees out there that might fall under the broader definition. So I think we should limit this at the county level to sheriff's office and youth services and correction staff. That's just my opinion.
Yeah, speaking as someone who's been thrown up on working as a correction staff, yes, I think that's just about right.
I would just like to note that when that first directive came out, there was quite a bit of confusion of who it included because in that directive, there was certain people listed. And so I totally get everything that's being discussed, but I would just like to mention that there's also going to be others that like community corrections, or I know Sarah for general assistance, the people that do house arrest situations. Those are kind of people in the same situations that they have statutory duties and they are required to be in the same close contact. So yeah, whoever you guys want this to apply to, that's fine. I just need to know the kind of for sure list.
I think we should go with those three groups, and if we hear from other elected officials or department directors that they want to be included, we could reevaluate at that time. I also would like to see an email from from the sheriff, and from Brad Johnson, and from Shelley Schindler. Should any of their employees access the service, I want to know that right away. And then also, I think we should go ahead and access the health department funding now. And if that runs out, then I think we need to reevaluate. I'm not sure I'm willing to spend county funds then to continue this if we have another resource available that's funded by the state. So, I mean, that's a decision for another day, but
Fine. Yeah, we can talk that out at that time. Yeah.
Okay.
Director McDaniel, did you have something to add to this? I'm sorry, I saw you jumped on just now. Okay. All right.
Do we need a motion?
Think so.
Okay, I will move that we approve this policy, that we move forward with this policy that would allow employees who have met the criteria described here to take residence at the Hilton Inn and have meals compensated up to the $30 per day.
I would second that.
And just for clarification, we're specifically starting with LSO, county corrections, and youth services.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, yes.
And then we can have a discussion about expanding those to, general assistant staff or community corrections if needed.
I also just want to note from what I mentioned earlier was that kind of eligibility criteria, and Todd touched on that as well. The main thing being there was a list that the state uses, and we seem to believe they got that from the CDC on those who are higher risk. So that would kind of set criteria. So like Todd mentioned, if people are over 65, they have a cohabitant over 65 or with certain illnesses,
Right.
those would go through to determine if they're eligible for the housing.
Right. It could be if they were a single person that lived in an apartment alone, they wouldn't qualify for the program.
Correct.
Okay. So we have a motion and we have a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Jen, this is Carrie. Do you still want time on this Thursday's agenda for the same topic?
I would leave it right now because, we're going to try and get this, so we might have questions that we need answered
Okay.
on Thursday. So.
I'll leave it in place.
Sean, could we go ahead and recess the meeting and go to Board of Equalization? We have somebody that's wanting to speak on an item on the Board of Equalization agenda.
I'm okay with it.
Sure.
Yeah, let's go ahead and
It's
recess the
okay.
meeting
Let's go.
and convene in on Board of Equalization.
A copy of the Nebraska Open Meetings Act is located on the wall at the rear of the hearing room. Additionally, a copy of all written material to be discussed at today's open meeting is available at the back of the hearing room. The material can also be viewed on the county's website at lancaster.ne.gov. Agenda item 1 are minutes. Approve the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held on Tuesday, April 7th, 2020.
Move approval?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Number 2 are additions and deductions to the tax assessment rolls.
Move
Move
approval.
approval of the additions and deductions to the tax assessment rolls.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0. Number 3 is appeal on notice of taxable status for the following, and this is for Board of Regents.
Hey, so did we ever log in the camera in the Bill Oxford studio as a panelist or an attendee?
Apparently.
Oh.
Because I don't see it on there. Maybe I'm just missing it.
It's there now.
There he is.
There, Sean.
Good morning.
There it is. Perfect.
We can see you. Scott.
Does Dan need to swear me in or?
But we can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me now?
let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break while they get the sound issues figured out there. And then we will come back at 10:01 for them to, the Board of
Can you hear
Regents
me
to
now?
present.
Jamie's giving me the try now sign. No luck? Testing, 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 testing. Jamie, can you hear me?
Commissioners, I believe we have the audio issue straightened out.
we all good to go? Rebroadcasting? Looks like we are. Okay, we will proceed with item number 3, appeal on notice of taxable status for the following. And our first and only testifier is Board of Regents.
Good morning, Scott Gaines, Deputy County Assessor, Register Deeds, recommending denial of this appeal. Just a little background, this is an issue that is under litigation for the 2019 tax year. So until that, our position remains the same, that these are the food court commercial restaurants located within the downtown student union. So our office's position that is under appeal with Turk is that that does not constitute a public purpose. So our recommendation to the board is to deny the appeal, and there's a representative from Board of Regents here to offer some testimony as well.
Thank you, Nathan Clark, on behalf of the Board of Regents. We thought it would be constructive to come here today and just give a couple points for the board's consideration on what we agree is the primary issue here, which is whether these spaces that are provided to food vendors in the student union building to provide food to students, faculty, and staff are being used for a public purpose. We submitted a pretty robust protest statement with this number of exhibits attached to it, and I don't know if the commissioners have had an opportunity to read through the letter. And I won't go through it point by point, but a few items in there to point out. When we're asking whether these properties are used for a public purpose, UNL, I think everybody would agree, exists for the purpose of public education. That's its statutory mandate. That's Nebraska Revised Statutes 85, Section 102, is that it exists to provide the means for a public education to the residents of the state. Further, in the statutes governing the Board of Regents in Nebraska, and this again is cited in our protest statement, the Board of Regents is given specific statutory authority, and I'm reading here from the statute. It is authorized to lease to any person, form, or corporation such portions of the campus as may be necessary to be used as sites for, among other things, boarding, housing, and student activity purposes. So there's specific legislative authority for the board to lease portions of the campus for boarding, which the dictionary definition of boarding is providing meals to students, and for student activity purposes, which would comport with the use of the student union building as a whole. That exists for student government, for student legal services, for student activity. And another statute in that same chapter, that's 85-410, says when the board is exercising its powers to do that, the board shall constitute and be and is hereby created as a public corporation organized for educational purposes and is declared to be a government subdivision. I'm sorry, is someone speaking? It's hard to hear.
I think you're just picking up a background conversation from somewhere. I'm not sure what mic that is, but please continue. We can hear you pretty clearly. Okay, thank you.
So although there is the tax exemption statute, Title 77-2021A, exempting governmental property, that gives general criteria to apply to government property and ascertaining whether it's used for a public purpose.
Hold on, Nathan, I'm sorry, hold on.
Yes.
We're having technical issues.
Sure.
You just went quiet on us.
I guess I should look at the camera. All right.
is Nathan? Is he still there? Perfect. There you are. Okay. Yeah, that's much clearer. In an effort to try to reduce feedback and echo, I'm going to try to mute all commissioners, including myself here, so that the only mic that's open is the bigger room.
Okay, thank you. I'm not clear where I got cut off, so I'll backtrack a little bit, and I apologize if I repeat myself. The point I was making is that when we ask whether governmentally owned property is exempt from taxation, we look to Title 77-2021A. That's a general statute, and look to the criteria. However, in the special case of the Board of Regents in the University of Nebraska, there are special particular statutorily authorized authority the board has to lease these properties for boarding and for student activity purposes. When it does that, the legislature has said it is acting as a public corporation organized for educational purposes. And so our first argument is that simply by virtue of those statutes, we are fulfilling the public purpose element under 77-202. And I'm citing a lot of statutes. I don't know if what we sent is in front of everybody. I can always get into more detail on those if anybody has any questions. Another point we would like to raise is the case law on how to regard leases of portions of property, we think favors a grant of the appeal. As a general matter, we don't think it's appropriate in the circumstance of having an exempt parcel, in this case, the student union building, which I don't think anybody disagrees is entirely exempt. UNL has not received a notice of taxable status for the entire student union building. It's only received a notice as to these particular portions that are being used by vendors. The assessor's position that it can carve out those portions and look particularly to that use and not instead look to the predominant use of the entire building, we don't think is supported by the regulations or the case law. Again, I've cited cases and regulations in the protest letter I sent, but one example is a case we attached called Brown County Agricultural Society versus the Brown County Board of Equalization. And there, the Nebraska Court of Appeals was looking to a portion of a building that was used for the annual county fair. And what it did was to look at whether that portion was, in its words, quote, consistent with the overall public purpose of the entire building. And so here, we would argue that the same approach ought to be taken to the student union building. The overall purpose of the building is to provide resources, activities, et cetera, to students, is the provision of food options for them to purchase and use consistent with that overall purpose. And we respectfully argue that it is. Another case I would like to draw the board's attention to, which we were not retained until pretty shortly before the deadline, so I neglected to include this in our protest statement. The case is Upper Republican Natural Resources District v. Dundee County Board of Equalization. If anybody is interested in looking that up, that is 300 Nebraska Reports 256. And in that case, the Nebraska Court of Appeals says that when we're looking at a leased piece of property and asking whether it is being used for a public purpose, and it looks to case law around the country in its own cases and summarizes them by saying, when the lease procures performance of the exempt function for which the owner would or might have used the property if not leased, regardless of whether the private interests of the lessee are also served by such use, then the exemption should be granted. In other words, if these, and let me back up and say we do take the position that not all of these vendors are under a lease, and specifically the Starbucks vendor, which is a franchise. But putting that aside and assuming we're talking about leases, the question becomes, if those areas weren't being leased, would the university be providing food options for students with that property anyways? And again, this is part of what is being provided to students in the student union building. Yes, the university would be doing that anyhow. And so merely the fact that they've leased it and it has some pecuniary benefit to a private player does not take it out of the statute. I would briefly point the court to, I'm sorry, I'm used to arguing in front of courts, the commissioners to the mixed use property regulation. And that can be found and is quoted in the letter at Title 350, Chapter 15, Section 2. Oh, excuse me, I have some regulations floating around here. I'm sorry, Section 3.07, and that is talking about mixed use property. That is property that is used for both public and private purposes and how to regard those. As an initial point, I would say that that regulation talks specifically about having a non-exempt building and carving out portions of the building for exemption. So I think what that regulation is really talking about is a building that is used for private purposes and then a government entity comes in and rents some portion. This regulation does not provide a basis, and there's no other regulation that I have found that provides a basis for doing the reverse, which is the situation here. That is taking an entire parcel, which is exempt, in this case a student union building, and then selecting portions of that to take out of the exemption status. Instead, what the proper inquiry is are those portions, looking at the predominant portion, the predominant use of the entire property, do those portions get used in such a way that makes the predominant use of the entire property not for a public purpose? In this case, these food vendors selling meals to students, we suggest, does not take the entire student union building and all the various functions and services it provides out of exempt status. Even if we did say that that regulation did apply and we look to its criteria, it gives a number of factors to weigh. And I'm not going to go through these all unless the commissioners would like me to. I'm trying not to take up too much of your time, but those factors do, we think, weigh in favor of an exemption here. The final point I would make is that even if the commissioners disagree and think, well, we don't have to look at these leased portions with respect to the entire building and ask whether the predominant use of the entire building is for a public purpose. If we instead just look at those portions in isolation, again, our position is the commissioners shouldn't do that, but even if that was the approach they took, even then it should be exempt. And the reason is, and we've attached a number of sales figures for each of these vendors for the last 3 years, I believe, to the protest that we submitted. And those sales figures show quite clearly when school is in session, there's a certain number of sales. When it goes to the summer, when many students leave, those sales drop to less than half of their normal level. There are also dips that you can see over the winter break period and during the spring break period. This shows quite clearly, we think, that by far a majority of the sales that are being made here are being made to students, to faculty, and to staff. Also, those lease agreements we attached to the protest also all provide that those vendors are required to honor end cards. So what the university is doing here is providing food options to students. It's in furtherance of its public purpose of public education to give students the means of attaining an education and giving them food options on campus. And to the extent there are any sales to private persons, the sales figures clearly show that the vast majority of sales are not to private persons and are to people associated with the university. I'd be happy to take any questions from the commissioners. Otherwise, I'll be done.
Do we have any questions? Commissioner Amundson?
Just a kind of an interesting question. If instead of leasing that property to private companies, Valentino's, et cetera, what would it be entirely exempt if the University of Nebraska provided on their own, if they provided the restaurants? In fact, had kind of like the University of Nebraska food court that the food services of Nebraska, University of Nebraska would prepare.
I mean, yes, we think it would be exempt, and I'm not going to get into specifics, but I do think that there are examples of university-owned portions of the campuses that do serve food to students that have never been given a notice of taxable status. Those exist on both the East Campus and the main campus. And the reason would be, again, that the question is it being used consistently with the public purpose of public education? Students who can stay on campus, attend their classes, stop in for a meal to grab a bite between classes, don't have to leave campus. This is in furtherance of the university's statutorily mandated public purpose. And so we would say, yes, those would be exempt under the standard that I quoted to you from the Dundee Republican Natural Resource District case. If the university would be using that space for that purpose anyhow, simply leasing it doesn't take it out of exempt status.
I'm sorry, and I'm not an attorney and I'm not a judge, but I haven't heard anything here that made me think that I haven't heard any new arguments from when we heard this last year on the same issue and we denied it. What's the difference now? I mean, last year we made pretty clear distinctions between a university-run food or a university-run cafeteria providing boarding for students versus private industry, and I think there was a lot of discussion last year too about does the Valentinos serve more of a public purpose than the Wendy's that's across the street, 70 yards away, and it seemed to me like it didn't, but what's different now, I guess, is what I'm trying to from last year.
I will say that it is my understanding that the protest was attended last year directly by somebody from the university. I'm an attorney with a law firm. We weren't retained at that point. I don't know that all the arguments, and these are arguments we will be pressing in the Turk appeal for the 2019 tax year, were forwarded and brought to the board's attention last year. We just wanted to be sure, and I'm not clear, but I also believe maybe not everybody on the board last year was here this year or vice versa.
You're right. Commissioner Yoakum was not here for that,
okay.
I believe.
We just wanted to give the board a full airing of the arguments we will be pressing with Turk as to the 2019 year, and it wasn't clear to us that all those positions were forwarded at last year's protest, which we did not attend, so I'm not clear on what was and was not discussed. I'm happy to address any of those questions if you'd like me to now.
Sure. Commissioner Amundson?
I am not interested in changing, I'm not interested in changing my point of view on that. And if it goes to Turk, then it goes to Turk, and then we'll comply with whatever Turk says. But as of this point in time, I'm not interested in changing my viewpoint.
Yeah, Commissioner Best.
I would just like to confirm, I had a little trouble hearing Scott, but Scott's position and the county assessor's position is that they see no reason to change the position at this time.
That was my understanding. The staff urged that we deny the request. Yeah.
With the same arguments that we had last year, and the fact that it's currently being litigated for 2019, until such time as the litigation produces a result that would make us move in a different direction, we're requesting the board be consistent and deny this appeal, and presumably that will result in a 2020 Turk case that will most likely be consolidated.
Go ahead, Deb.
I move that we follow the advice of the county assessor and deny this appeal.
I second that.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion?
With all due respect to Nathan, thank you for coming out this morning and sharing your thoughts. But I'm going to agree with the other commissioner.
Okay. If there's no other discussion, then please call the roll.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Very good.
Next
all
is number 4, public hearing for motor vehicle tax exemption applications. This is for Lincoln Christian School and Lincoln Literacy Council.
Are there any members of the public here to speak on this? I'm assuming not. Unless the clerk staff tells me no, we will go ahead and close the public hearings on this.
Next is number 5, action on motor vehicle tax exemption applications.
I
Move approval of the second.
We've got a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
I move we adjourn the Board of Equalization.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. Is there any discussion? Please call the roll.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Vest,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Very good. We will return to the regular Board of Commissioners meeting. So we will reconvene. And for our last item here, we're on item number 6B, and we are here to now talk about the Board of Equalization. So we are talking about Board of Equalization hearings in regards to this brave new world of COVID-19.
Good morning. Can everybody hear me? Corey Beatty with the County Clerk's Office. I guess we're just wanting to follow up on a discussion we had at the staff meeting last Thursday about the direction the board would like us to take with regard to Board of Equalization hearings for this summer. Dan, I don't know if you have anything to offer.
Well, obviously, there's a lot of unknowns at this point, but if this virus situation continues, we obviously have concerns about having face-to-face meetings. I understand there is the statutory requirements. There's a possibility of doing phone hearings as well. So I think on the email I sent you guys Monday, I believe it was, or Friday, kind of explained our thinking on the situation.
Yeah, I've spoken with Joe Cohout about this, and he's putting some questions into the state government about, is it possible that we might be able to, for example, get the governor to issue an order allowing us to do protests via phone, something like that. I don't think we want in-person protests, and I don't think we want to deny the right to protest either. So I think, given this, given that we're conducting a public meeting via Zoom right now, I don't see why we can't do something along those lines for these protests. At the very least on a telephone. I think that would be sufficient, and people could submit whatever documentation they wanted via email.
I'm going to remind you, there's a lot of things that have to come into play here real quickly. We're 5 weeks out now from June 1st. You got policies and procedures that need to be adopted. We may have to do some programming and so forth. So this isn't anything we can really sit on. We're going to need some action on this real soon, because there's things that have to fall into place before June 1st.
Okay, so Dan, in making a request to the governor, would it apply only to Lancaster County and Douglas? and Sarpy? I mean,
That
are
would,
we
that would,
asking just for us?
I guess that would be up to how he would handle that, but I mean, we're obviously the biggest users would be Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy, but to me, it's a statewide situation.
And so the executive order that he already issued was only for public bodies.
Yeah, governing bodies, I think.
Governing bodies. So would we just be extending that executive order to include, or would we be asking for include Board of Equalization hearings, or would we be asking for an entirely new executive order?
I think, Deb, what we would, and I'm not an attorney or anything, but the way that I understand the statute and from the county attorney is that we have to offer face-to-face hearings. We would like to see that this year only be phone hearings.
That the in-person component possibly be suspended, whereby,
yes.
yeah. So we already have a two-pronged approach with either having a hearing or people do have the option to waive, and I'm sure that will be somewhat popular again this year. But moving to a three-pronged approach where we allow phone hearings, in-person, or waived, or even, I'm going to go a four-pronged approach, in-person, meaning in the same room, Zoom, or some kind of video conferencing, phone, and waived. Logistical nightmare.
Yeah.
But we can
The
try and
one
work
thing
our
I wanna-
magic. But
Sorry, Corey.
That's
The one
okay.
thing I want to caution regarding Zoom meetings is, and actually, Corey, you were the one who brought this up to me, is we need to make sure that any documentation that they have, that they're not just simply showing it on the camera to the, that they actually have to submit it and send it in so that we have a copy of it and so that there's a record, so that later on we can't just say, oh, well, I showed it to him. It was on the Zoom meeting, so.
yes, from a record-keeping nightmare, though, or from a record-keeping perspective, those kinds of things get very complicated.
Yeah.
Probably what we need to do, I think, is to wait until Joe Coho talks with the governor's staff, finds out basically some direction from him so that we do not go too far forward and then have to backtrack.
And I think he's having similar conversations with Douglas County, Sarpy County. I think he's trying to rally up the big three to put in a request along these lines, which I think is smart. This is really a question for the attorneys. I mean, I'm completely with the county clerk staff in this, and I think we should be able to do these by phone, and I think that would be a far simpler process. But we don't have any authority to make that happen, right? That's got to come from the governor. Like,
Correct.
As much as we might love to do it, yeah, okay, all right.
I mean,
We never get one-word answers from our attorneys. I love that.
Yeah, unless, yeah, we don't, I mean, yeah, we would not advise that you guys completely scrap the public hearings that are required by statute. That would have to come from the governor.
but Jen, we could move forward right now in our planning process and offer phone hearings as an option in addition to in-person and waived, correct? Right now, we
Yes,
have
I
the
will-
authority to do that.
Yes, I believe, yeah, Dave had reached out to you and said that, yeah, you were leaning towards doing the telephonic hearings, and we think, yeah, that would be an acceptable solution.
So we can right now provide the option of telephonic hearings, but we cannot take away the option of in-person hearings at this time without the governor's help.
Correct.
Correct. That is my understanding.
Well, and so and Dan, you've had conversations with Douglas County, correct, with the clerk there?
Yes.
So it would be most likely a joint letter from the three of us making this request to.
Correct.
I
think we should be drafting something.
I think Joe's working on.
Joe's on that, okay.
Yeah. He's been talking to Sarpy and Douglas. I think he's got some draft language, and if not, he was certainly talking about getting some draft language yesterday.
Okay.
I mean, part of the thing we're up against, up against, I mean, hearings don't start till middle or end of June, so, you know, it's, there's a lot of unknowns that far out. And we're just trying to be prepared here and we want citizens and staff and appraiser, everybody to be safe, so.
But yeah, we can't wait.
Well, if we find out direction possibly in a week or so, is that going to be a little bit enough time for you? I don't know if we can make that decision right now. I think that with the option of the telephonic, that would be good to know.
Yeah. I think we direct our staff to move forward with setting up a telephonic option or even a Zoom option as the clerk's office deems appropriate. And I think we pursue and some direction from the governor via Joe Coho.
I mean, the simplest for us would be just to have the one option, just the phone hearings. That's why we're requesting this.
Yeah, no, and that's, I think that's absolutely the preferred option. Yeah. We're just not empowered to make that decision. I wish we were.
Mm-hmm. When do you open up slots for scheduling? When does that sign up calendar go live, Corey?
June 1st, first day of filing.
Okay.
But we need time to reprogram our database and all that. So I believe Douglas County has impressed upon in their communications, either through their lobbyist or direct to the state, that time is of the essence because we're all in the same boat. We all have things that we need to do procedurally to prepare for what I would call a considerable change. So maybe, Carrie, if we keep this item on the Thursday agenda and just keep the BOE hearings or the BOE policies and procedures kind of in the forefront from meeting to meeting, week to week, we can come back with any new information that's gathered.
Yeah, and let's I'd actually would rather put it in under Joe and Brennan's weekly discussion, because that's, I mean, they're the ones who are really going to be able to make some movement on this for us.
And we will be coming forward too in the next few weeks, along with the referee coordinator and the county attorney. Obviously, they'll have input on the policies and procedures and all the contracts and all that kind of stuff, as we do every year to get prepared for this process. So,
yep. Carrie, you were starting to say something, but you were on mute.
Yeah. No, I'll just say I'll put it under Thursday's report under the legislative update.
Perfect. We'll talk about it on Thursday. I spoke with Joe about this yesterday morning and last Friday, I think too. But I'll give him a call on this. I think we're all of the same mind here. Is that right? The board's all in agreement on this that we would like to pursue.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm seeing thumbs up and head nods from everybody. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Also, Sean, I'm just going to loop NACO in just so they know what we're doing. Even though it just impacts the three of us, I think that they should be aware.
Absolutely. Yep. So I'll give Joe a call when we get off here from this, and we'll talk it through, and I'll make sure that he's aware of it and can discuss it on Thursday. So do we need any action here? Is there?
No, I think you've given sufficient direction that people will be working on the plans, and we'll discuss it with Joe to get an update on where we are with the letter to the governor. I don't know what else we can do at this point.
Okay. All right. I'm satisfied then.
Okay. Next is announcements.
Oh, yeah, we got announcements.
The Lancaster County Board of Commissioners will hold a staff meeting via Zoom on Thursday, April 23rd, 2020 at 8:30 a.m. The Lancaster County Board of Commissioners will hold its next regular meeting on Tuesday, April 28th, 2020 at 9 a.m. via Zoom. County Commissioners can be reached at 402-441-7447 or commish@lancaster.ne.gov. The Lancaster County Board of Commissioners meeting is broadcast live on Link TV City. For the rebroadcast schedule, visit lincoln.ne.gov. Meetings are also streamed live on Link TV and can be viewed on YouTube.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for adjournment. Is there any discussion? Very good. Call the roll, please.
Vest,
Yes.
Shore,
Yes.
Amundson,
Yes.
Yocum,
Yes.
Flowerday.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
We
Okay,
are-
before you all run off, I